Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, the creator and founder of Advanced Health Genetics, the Hormetics Weight Optimization System, and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. And lovely listeners, as always, you guys are great. You're creating a great community. We love your questions. We love your engagement, and we love coming here and bringing you episodes, just like the one we're going to do today. So this episode today we've discussed a few things in the past about diet and food choices and how to eat and weight loss and all of those things, but there's always still so much conflicting information around what's the best things to eat to lose weight. So we thought we'd give you an episode on that today. So Elwyn, tell me, why do you think there's so much conflicting information on what the best diet is or foods that people should eat to lose weight?
It's a good question. We didn't prepare anything for this episode, so I didn't know what you were going to say. But I happened to be thinking about this earlier, which is, I think one of the things that gets in the way is I so often see, and I see it in the comments, but I think I see it in people's books and diet systems and all the rest of it, that there's this specific idea that we're designed to eat a certain way. And there tends to be a universalist kind of attitude to it as well, meaning like we are all meant to, we are all designed to. And it's funny how many people who, aren't really religious suddenly start talking in these very religious terms when it comes to food. Because, of course, if we're looking at science, which, if I would just do these episodes and say we should eat this way because God told us to, or because God told me to tell you that's how we should eat, most people will turn off, right? They're generally tuning in because they want to hear science. They want to hear, facts and evidence and all the rest of it. If your viewpoint is innately religious, then fair enough. I do respect that. And, it's not the episode to discuss that, but I have a lot of, I can relate to it. But the scientific perspective is that we weren't designed, and we're not a finished product. That we are, not only that we have evolved, but we are still in the process of evolving, and that we're not a finished product. And I don't think that view necessarily actually conflicts with religion at all, because you can still believe there's a creator, but you could say there's a creator who gave us free will a long time ago, and the direction that we've gone in has led us to this particular situation, this particular circumstances, that we've evolved. We've adapted to the environment by going in a specific direction. You can even believe not only that there is a creator, but that there is a creator who is overseeing everything and guiding everything and, micromanaging every step of the way. And still, you don't have to believe that we are designed to eat a certain diet. You could still believe that evolution itself is, created by the creator and overseen and directed by the creator. So the two viewpoints don't even clash. And I say all that not to get into the heady world of religion, but to say, the idea that we are a finished product designed to eat a specific diet is a very religious idea, and it is a very unscientific idea. So what I'm saying, you don't have to be one or the other, you can be both. But if you're both, it doesn't really include that idea, if that makes sense. Like the reality is that it looks like, unless all of history is fake and all the rest of it, which a few people believe, but that we've had a bunch of different environments. There was a while where, we were hunter-gatherers, a lot of our ancestors. There was a while where maybe there was an abundance of plant foods available. There was a while when there wasn't, maybe during an ice age where plant foods are pretty scarce. There was a while where some of our ancestors were very agrarian, but some of our ancestors were not. There are still hunters and gatherers living in the world right now, even though there aren't that many of them. And so if we consider all those things, as I say, unless we consider all of that just, an illusion or something like that, if we consider all of that, then we have to realize that, some of us, if we had much more recent hunter-gatherer ancestors, would be more adapted to hunter-gatherer diets. Some of us, if we had agrarian ancestors who were, growing crops, grains especially, as a quite a calorie dense crop, back tens of thousands of years ago, and still to this day, grains are one of the main crops. Um, then maybe we've adapted to that to some degree. Some of us more than others, and whether that's a good thing or not, that can be argued about. And then, of course, those of us whose ancestors were on, I don't know, small islands might be more adapted to eating fish and maybe high levels of polyunsaturated fats and omega-3s versus, those of us who grew up in, the middle of a big landmass, where that would be less likely to be a staple part of our diet. I mean, I could go on, and I don't want to make this episode about that because it's not about that. But just to answer the question, I think that's a big thing that, and it's so compelling because the truth is kind of messy and the truth is difficult. Like, one of the difficulties, just to get really practical for a second after being very theoretical there, is it's often the case that within a family, let's say even mother, father, children, but certainly even more so if it's an extended family, that the right diet for every person at that dinner table is probably quite different. So the mother should be eating something quite different from the father, from one of the children to the other children. Now, obviously, when it comes to brothers and sisters, the genetic factor is not so big as to why they should eat differently, but it's still significant because, especially if the mother and father are very different, and they often are, then maybe one child, the son takes more after the mother, and the daughter takes more after the father, and so this idea that there's one perfect diet that we should all eat, I think, is the number one fallacy that gets in the way of people finding the right diet for them. So there's the kind of what we're like our starting place, which is mainly what I've talked about, our ancestors, our DNA, stuff like that. And then there's also our circumstances, like I think it's generally agreed upon, understood that someone who's living a very intensive lifestyle with hours and hours of physical exertion a day probably shouldn't be eating exactly the same diet as someone who's very sedentary. And it goes beyond just the amount of calories as well. It's also the level of other things, the level of protein is sometimes talked about. Okay, but what about other nutrients? I would also say someone who does a very demanding job mentally with a lot of stress is going to burn through more nutrients than someone who has a fairly easy kind of lackadaisical quality of life. And that's just something that needs to be addressed as well, let alone all the problems. What about someone who's got some kind of toxicity, their body is suffering from some kind of mild poisoning? What about someone who has developed some kind of allergy in one of the major food groups or several of the major food groups they just can't eat? Like, there's all these confounding factors that make it like impossible for this one size fits all diet. And yet the most popular people out there selling diet advice, that's almost always what they do. You occasionally see people who've like, maybe there's 2 or 3 types, the blood type diet or the metabolic typing diet or something like that, where there's like a handful of options to choose from. But that's it. That's the maximum level of complexity that most people get into. Now, I do understand it, because the complete opposite of that, someone saying, what's your diet? Oh, it totally depends. Like, that's not helpful either, because it's so broad and vague in general, it's useless. So don't worry, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, listen to your intuition, man. Like, that also doesn't work in most cases. And let me address why that doesn't work. It's because, unfortunately, the more out of balance, the more unhealthy your body is, the more that the signals it sends you are corrupted and inaccurate and unhelpful. Most obvious example is, as an addict, I was an addict of several things in my teens and 20s. If I asked my body, what does it want? It would say, more drugs, please. Like, that's just what, bodies do when they're out of balance. And so we can't 100%, trust and listen to and rely on the signals of our body, depending on how out of balance and corrupted, messed up, dysregulated, whatever terms you want to use. It's the body's own signals and instincts are not 100% reliable anymore, although we can still get useful clues from it, no matter how dysregulated it is. But generally, the more dysregulated it is, the more untrustworthy our body signals unfortunately are. So the whole just listen to your body man thing, can't do that. The whole everyone just sticks to one perfect diet that we're designed to eat, that's based on nonsense. So what does that leave us? It leaves us with trying to work out what's actually right for us. And as you said, Christy, we have done episodes like this before, but they've been more with a specific other focus, usually health, just to make it broad. And this one, we're going to focus on how to optimize weight, lose weight. But I'm not encouraging people who are already thin to be more thin. So that's why I prefer the term optimize weight.
No, that's really good. I mean, yeah, because again, we are in a world where, as you said, there are many people out there promoting one particular type of thing. And it just doesn't quite make sense, as you just said in the beginning when you were talking about the theoretical aspects there, that there's one perfect diet for every human being on this planet. It just doesn't. Yeah, we're all, like, as we've said, case by case a lot of times. And also, too, yeah, you make a really great point that when you sit down at that dinner table, it doesn't mean that one meal is going to be perfect for everybody.
It makes sense in a Disney cartoon kind of version of reality. I don't want people to. There's some of the most sophisticated thinkers throughout history were very strongly religious. I really didn't want to make it sound like I was picking on religion. It's more the kind of I'd say the utopian idealist who is really more prey to the fantasies in this area, like this idea that it's thinking that there's one perfect diet that we should all be able to eat is probably on the same strata of intellectual thought to me as like if we all just were nice to each other and freely shared, everything would be paradise. It's like, even if it's true, like, it wouldn't work in practice. And it's the kind of same with the diet thing. The confounding thing with that is that there are a certain amount of people who are just born kind of psychopathic, and they'll always ruin it for even the other 98% try really, really hard. Because that's just the reality of life. And so that's another example of, like, just ignoring reality and clinging to a utopian ideal. And I think it's the same with food. And I bring up the family all eating, needing to eat different things, because again, it's like it's both utopian. It's a nice idea that as a family you could all sit around and enjoy and thrive on exactly the same foods, but also on a practical level, of course, it's an absolute pain to be preparing different foods for different people. And a lot of the time I think people become attached to things that they wish were true, either for idealistic reasons, but maybe more often even just for practical reasons. An example of this, to kind of dip our toes in the water of what foods to eat, for instance, is there's a lot of people you see saying, "Oh, organic foods, like, they're no better, they're no different from non-organic foods," and some of them are like mainstream scientific people who really want to cling to their mainstream views. But I've actually found a lot of them are not that. They're just people who, unfortunately, don't have a lot of money and can't afford organic foods. And so they much rather believe that, there is nothing good about organic foods because I can't afford them. And, this is a human tendency in general. If I can't have it, I didn't want it anyway. This is a way of kind of maintaining ego, maintaining pride. So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting psychological dynamics that go into some of these illusions around food. And I just want to say I will not be pandering to any of them, which is why this will probably never be as successful a diet as any of the ones that you've actually heard of. But I'm here to tell you the truth. So there we go.
Bring on the truth. But before we get into that truth about what we're going to discuss today, which is how to optimize weight, what is it that actually drives weight loss?
That's a good question. Well, the simple answer, if you were to put that into Google or probably most AI search engines, is some combination of burn more calories and eat less, right? It's as simple as that to them. And of course, if this were true, then we wouldn't have an obesity epidemic. And so this is the problem. Whenever there is a mainstream kind of belief that things are a certain way, and then the reality is just such an obvious rebuke of that, all kinds of complicated and silly explanations have to be created to justify it. And so in this case, I suppose it's not that complicated, but it's definitely silly to me. The explanation is most of you are just so goddamn weak-willed and lacking in discipline. So if you just exercised more and you just ate less, you would lose weight. And I hear you tried it before. I don't really believe you, and you didn't do it properly, and you didn't do it long enough, and you didn't do it concertedly enough, and all the rest of it. And it's kind of a lot of blaming and shaming people who usually have tried really hard, often for a very long period of time. No, not consistently every day for 20 years, or sometimes for people who've had the issue for a long time, admittedly. But the so-called giving up, from my perspective, is really just the body's innate instincts going into survival mode and kicking in and saving that person from making things even worse. The complete answer is, probably another episode that we did already about hormonal imbalances. But yeah, I really believe that hormonal imbalances are at the root of both weight gain and not being able to lose weight. And of course, as it always is, it's sometimes more complicated than that. Ultimately, I go to my Rejuvenate blueprint to look at the root cause of all chronic illnesses. So for instance, some hormonal imbalances admittedly are caused by other factors. They're caused by, trauma. They're caused by, excess toxic exposure. They're caused by, various different things. But the point is, if you look at it at the level of the hormones, if you find someone who wants to lose weight and finds it in any way difficult, which is almost everyone who wants to lose weight, you'll discover that there is one or more of 5 hormonal imbalances at play, which are keeping them from being able to lose weight or making losing weight really difficult. And so when they talk about, just move more, eat less, what they're talking about is, here's the thinking behind it. If you eat less calories, but your body burns the same amount of calories, your body will start to dig into your reserves of calories, your fat, hopefully, although often it is muscle and other things if it's not done correctly, and you'll lose weight. That's the thinking. The other thinking is, if everything else stays the same and you just burn more calories by exercising more, then you will burn more calories. And if you're not eating more as well, then your body will have to burn it in terms of burning fat. And so that's the thinking behind it. And it makes sense. It's just extremely simplistic and, unfortunately, most of the time inaccurate, and also a lot of the time impractical. And so, one example of this is, for instance, if you eat less and you burn the same amount of calories, then yes, you will lose weight. The problem is, usually, if you eat less, your body adapts to you eating less by burning less calories. Like, it's not static. And the other challenge is, a lot of people go the other route. They go the fitness route of, working out very hard in the gym and all the rest. They will often find themselves eating more when they're doing intense exercise. So that's like the really simple answer. There is a lot more to it, and I think we'll give some general advice, Chrissy, and then we'll touch on more specific advice for each of the hormonal imbalances when it comes to food specifically. Although we've done general advice already, but the 5 hormonal imbalances are, so I just touched on one there, low metabolism. The body can easily slow down the metabolism for many different reasons, although not eating is often the number one cause. And that will make it almost impossible to lose weight. High cortisol, that can, it's a high stress thing, that can make it very difficult to lose weight. Insulin resistance, where the insulin builds up because it can't get into the cells, that can make it hard to lose weight. Leptin resistance, which is really the same thing, that leptin can't affect its receptors properly. That can cause someone to not be able to lose weight, usually through excess hunger, and we'll talk about that one probably before the others. And then lastly, estrogen dominance, where there is a high level of estrogen in relation to progesterone and or testosterone than there should be. And so any of those hormonal imbalances can make it seem impossible for people to lose weight. And it's not actually impossible if you address those hormonal imbalances. And so, yeah, again, I wasn't expecting that question, Chrissy, but I'm glad you brought it up because it is an essential prerequisite to everything else we're going to talk about in this video. Because you have to address that first. Like, you have to address what hormonal imbalance you have, or often, although not always, there's more than one, and like follow those recommendations really to lose weight. This is more an adjunct to that. And if you don't know what we're talking about, if you haven't seen any of those episodes, watch them. But you can also find out your type by going to hormetics.health. That's where our free quiz is that will help you to work out exactly what hormonal imbalances are holding you back from being the optimal weight.
Great. Thank you for that breakdown, because you know me, I always like to know the why and the how and the mechanisms. So that's always good. So yeah, so what is the best diet to lose weight? Or let me reframe that. What is the best diet for weight optimization?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, actually that's a great correction there, but yeah, all right, I'll be honest. The best diet to lose weight is starving yourself, right? Or not eating. Eating almost nothing or not eating is the best diet to lose weight. I got to be honest, right? Now, here's the challenge. Number one, if you do that, it creates lots of other problems. You end up with nutritional deficiency, at least, quite a few, which are extremely important because every, essential nutrient is, it's kind of catastrophic to your body if it has a very low amount, and it's pretty debilitating to the body even if it has a moderately low amount. And ending up with a moderately low amount of a bunch of different nutrients, if you're starving yourself for a long period of time, is very likely. So that's an obvious reason not to do it. Second reason I already touched upon earlier, it will substantially slow down your metabolism. And if and when you start eating normally again, or even excessively, which is not as unlikely as you might think, because if your body, this is why I did it in this order, this explanation, if your body detects this substantial lack of all kinds of nutrients, it will often take over and make you eat a lot when it has the opportunity. And the opportunity might be, when you're stressed, when you're distracted, when you're exhausted, when you're something and your willpower is really, really low. That's for people operating on willpower. Obviously, if you're using powerful drugs to reduce your appetite, then you have a different challenge. We talked about that in another episode, so I won't go into all that again. But anyway, if your metabolism substantially slowed down by starving yourself, then when you start to eat again, your body's like, we got some nutrients again, great. But you know what? We can't trust that there'll be some every day because there hasn't been any for a long time. And so we better store as many as we can in the best storage form that we can, which is fat. So that's another problem with starving yourself. Another problem with starving yourself is it raises stress chemicals like cortisol. That also makes it really difficult to lose weight. There are other issues, but let's stick to those three for a second. So, substantial nutritional deficiencies. We're seeing it these days with GLP-1s, where people, especially, they are low in protein, most obviously, and they're starting to get that kind of emaciated, just unattractive look. And I don't say that to be judgmental. I really don't put that much emphasis on anyone's appearance, including my own. I say that only to say because the whole reason they're doing it is to look more attractive, and then they look less attractive because they're ending up being so depleted in proteins specifically and nutrients in general. So yeah, that's unfortunate, right? So, and it creates several different hormonal imbalances, but I'd say low metabolism and high cortisol would be the most likely ones. Although high estrogen is also very possible as well. So starvation will do it, but or anything approaching starvation, even something that feels like starvation. But the problem is everything I just said into the actual problem, and then the real problem, it's not sustainable. like eventually, as I already said, you will break and you will eat again, and almost certainly you will actually gain more weight. And this is why the statistic is that 97% of diets fail, not just within a year, not just fail as in don't work, don't meet the expectations, don't meet goals, don't lose enough weight. Fail as in over 90% of the time, the person actually gains weight. So, with such a horrendous record of failure, you'd think that we would be rethinking this dieting approach. But instead, we don't. We're now taking, again, I guess this is not the first time, powerful drugs to make it very difficult to eat enough. And I will actually say enough rather than too much. Certainly at the levels that they're being given. I've discussed it with doctors on here, and potentially at a very, very low level, it might just stop you eating excessively. But at the amount that it's generally used, even at the starting dose, it's way too much, and it causes you to not eat enough, and it's not sustainable. In most cases, everyone's different, as I was talking about at the beginning. So that's the starvation challenge. So what's the alternative? The alternative is something that almost no one seems to want to do. And the first thing I just want to bring up, which is the only reason I brought up GLP-1s again, even though I guess I talk about them too much, is to make this distinction between full and fulfilled. Because like cheating to make someone feel full, as in like their stomach is full, this is, the GLP-1s are the latest version of this. What other things have been trying these tricks before?
Oh, I mean, the stomach stapling and, the bariatric, that surgery, things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the extreme end is literally, shrinking the amount of usable stomach space with something like a gastric bypass. Absolutely. But I was thinking of other stuff, Rishi. What about the advice of, if you're hungry, drink water instead, filling up the stomach with water instead? What about like the diet noodles they sell with like 0 calories that just swell in your stomach, for instance, right? There's like generally this is what about just the advice to eat a big bowl full of salad, which is not necessarily always bad, but it is just a bowl full of mainly fiber, water, and some micronutrients, but very little calories. What all of these strategies, which are kind of classic, have in common is they're all based on making you feel full as opposed to making you feel fulfilled, right? No one feels full from a big bowl of salad unless, I suppose, they augment it with a bunch of bacon bits and cheese and
really
olives
great dressing and some croutons maybe.
Right, and some slices of bread for the carbs and all the rest. Yeah, exactly. But the classic bowl of green leaves, and I did it. I mean, I was raw vegan for a couple of years, and I kind of did it by adding a massive amount of fats, raw fats with it to leave me feeling full. And even that was full, I would say, not really fulfilled, although, at least I was fulfilled with calories. But yeah, most people aren't doing that either, right? If they're trying to lose weight, they're not bulking on as you said, the dressings and the mayo and all the rest of it. They're mainly having the green leaves. And so this will fill up your stomach in the same way that GLP-1s will make your stomach feel full by basically preventing it from emptying in a timely manner, but they do not leave you fulfilled. Here's the thing about human nature in general. Feeling fulfilled is really important to humans, mammals, multicelled organisms. I mean, it's one of the primary drivers of all life on Earth is to consume, whether we like that or not, and to consume how long? Up until the point that we feel fulfilled or satiated, and maybe sometimes even a little bit more, because a lot of the time we knew scarcity was around the corner, as it has been for most species throughout most of existence. And so to chronically not feel fulfilled makes us feel like we are failing at life, right? What's going to happen? What's likely to happen to an animal that never feels satiated? They're probably going to die, and they're probably not going to be able to reproduce. They're certainly not going to be dominant in the pack, or like have any kind of high status or a large territory if they're solo animals or whatever it might be. This is not a successful animal. An animal that never feels or hardly ever feels satiated is not an animal that's going to feel successful, high self-esteem, happy, whatever you want to call it, because it's just an essential prerequisite, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of thing. Like, I don't think it's been focused on enough. I mean, there's that saying of, any country is only a few missed meals away from revolution. It's the same idea that you can put people through a lot of abuse, but when, generally tyranny and torture and lack of freedom and all kinds of really terrible things, but if you stop feeding them, that's when there's the highest chance that they're going to overthrow you, surprisingly. Or not surprisingly, if you really understand this perspective that I'm trying to drive home. So I say all this to say, again, not to be trying to throw my own philosophy or theology in there, but to say this: when you are trying to discover and work out the right diet for you to lose weight, the key prerequisite to me that means it's actually going to be successful, and what I see in practice, is you have to feel fulfilled. You have to feel satiated. Now, for some people, that feeling is very difficult. And this is because the hormone that makes you feel fulfilled, leptin, is not working correctly. Specifically, there's a resistance. Often there is plenty of it floating around in your blood, but it's not getting into the cells. It's not hitting the receptors as it should. And so you're not getting that signal that you are satisfied. And so that may be something that's going on for you. Some of the signs are that you're frequently thinking about food throughout the day, that, you find it hard to stop eating once you start eating, and there's a bunch of others. So if you do the quiz, the hormetics quiz, you can, evaluate in a more scientific way if that one may apply to you and to what degree. I guess it does to all of us to some degree, but some of us are fine with being satiated. I put myself in that category, but some of us are not. It's extremely difficult for some people to feel satiated. So I say that to say, first, as a kind of caveat, if you have that hormonal imbalance, then nothing you do food-wise is going to satiate you very easily. So you kind of have to address that. But on the other hand, even if you have addressed that, or in the process of addressing that, or never had a problem with leptin, the other thing is you do have to make sure that the food that you're eating is actually satiating. Otherwise, you will not stick with it long term. Even if you're taking those drugs, this is what I see. Eventually, the body rebels. Maybe it starts giving side effects to those drugs that make you stop taking them. Maybe it starts, giving you thoughts in your head like, oh, I don't like it, I don't want to do it. Like, and ditto about the fasting, the juice fasting, and the intermittent fasting, the keto, the whatever that you're on. Like, the body, thank God, from my perspective, usually rebels sooner or later and gets you right back into eating what it considers to be a more satiating diet, even though there are some problems with the diet that people generally feel satiated with that we're about to talk about. But still, like, we have to actually, acknowledge reality. We have to acknowledge that we have to feel satiated. Maybe not all the time. This is what the pro-fasting people are, talking about. Like, many of our ancestors didn't. But here's the caveat I'm going to give you. Yes, just like with most animals in the world today, depending on all kinds of factors, starvation was never far away and is never far away. That's true. However, a lot of how a person feels is dependent on that satiation. And so, sure, sometimes your ancestors may have not, they may have had to fast, starve, go without for a while. But do you think during those times they were generally like, "Yay, I'm so happy with my life. I'm so proud of myself." No, right? They were feeling not good, some version of not good. Um, and there were some advantages to that temporarily from the body can do some cleaning house, but to the degree that it's actually helpful for that, I did this different episode really dissecting that. The bottom line is that feeling, I guess I'm using quite masculine terms here, like feeling successful, heavily depends upon how often you're feeling this satiated feeling. But actually, I think feeling loved does as well, because on a primal level, if you're not the one gathering or hunting the food at the time, then you might well be dependent on someone who is, whether you're a child or in that position, and so.
No, I would say, sorry to interrupt, Owen. I just want to say you make such a valid point here with the satiation, because a lot of times I think when we feel empty inside, we're trying to fill ourselves up with things, and food can be a big part of that. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that just sprung a thought.
Absolutely. But I guess what a point I'm getting to is it's much more primal than other things that people might want to do to like fill up the emptiness inside. In fact, it's the most primal. Think about, if you're watching the nature documentaries about, I don't know, I love penguins, right? And so the parents go off and the chicks are left on their own. And now think about how the little penguin chick feels, who's the parents both regularly come back with lots of fish, right? Versus the one, like, maybe only one parent comes back. It's not very much food, or maybe, I don't know, they both come back, but they take much longer. Like, the one who receives much more food and feels satiated more often is going to feel more loved. Like, that's just that's how it's going to feel. And it's the same if someone is providing for you, for any other number of circumstances, right? So whether you're the provider or the providee, and, you may be in both roles depending on the situation, the point is, feeling good is related to feeling satiated, and not feeling good is related to not feeling satiated. And so, of course, even though we really want to lose weight and, because we really want to look good or we want to feel better about ourselves or whatever it might be, these things about feeling successful or feeling loved are going to trump that ultimately. And so, again, it's super, super important to eat in a way that leaves you feeling satiated, not just full. And the crazy thing about the advice, that I'm giving is, unlike most of the advice I give, to be honest, it's pretty mainstream. It's mainstream in terms of, like, one client who's like, what had he lost? He'd lost about 8 kilos in 10 weeks. And he was saying it was pretty slow going. And I was like, you're ahead of schedule. I don't really want you losing more than a pound a week. That's because, now, admittedly, right, if someone is 200 pounds overweight and I say a pound a week, they're like, oh, God, what would that be, 4 years? I can see that would be a little bit off-putting to someone. But this is someone who, only wanted to lose 20, 30 at the most, 20, 30 weeks. It's not really that long to wait. So people, feel like they need to lose weight so quickly because they kind of, usually it's kind of building and building and I'm ignoring it. I'm pretending it's okay and blah, 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 blah. And then I hit this breaking point where I got to do something about this. I'm finally motivated and I just want it off me now. That's how people feel, this impatience. And of course it makes sense. Just like, if you're getting more and more broke and then more in debt, you're like, I want to be successful now. I want to be a millionaire now, or whatever, billionaire, whatever people want these days. But, unfortunately, it's just not how things do work. And it's also not how things should work. Generally it's found, for instance, that most people who win the lottery, so they go from nothing usually or very little to millions, after a few years, they are not only not better off, but on average actually worse off than they were before. And that's because, unfortunately, even if someone is broke, just handing them money does not solve their problems, which again, I guess is a different conversation. But, with the weight loss thing, unfortunately, like losing weight as quickly as possible is not desirable for all, first of all, because it usually involves starving yourself, which I've already addressed that. So back to the mainstream advice, what I really encourage people to do, like get to the bottom of it, find out what your actual caloric needs are, and eat about 250 to 300 calories less per day. But it's not as simple as that. But in terms of how much you should be starving yourself, that's the amount. And that's a generalization, because if your caloric intake needs are very low because you're very small, then it's probably even less. It's probably 200 calories a day less, something like that. But 200 to 300 calories a day, roughly. But we have to make sure that when you're doing that, that what you are eating is genuinely satiating you. And generally, we want it to satiate it more than it was before, when you were eating maybe whatever it was, 200, 300, 500 calories more than you should be eating to get into that position in the first place. So we want it to be more satiating. If you've ever typed into Google, why am I so tired all the time, even when I eat well and sleep 8 hours? Or why do I still have digestive issues when I eat cleaner and better than most people I know? Or why do I wake up every morning feeling in pain when I exercise and stretch every day? Then this is for you. I used to search for exact phrases like that at like 3 in the morning because I felt prematurely old and nothing was working. Now, here's the thing most doctors and even most functional medicine people still miss. Your symptoms are personal, so the solutions have to be personal too. And the most personal data you own is your own DNA. That's why I created Advanced Health Genetics All Access Membership. And the good thing is, if you ever did 23andMe, Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, any of the big Ancestry DNA tests, you can literally upload that old raw data file that you already have access to, and within a few hours get over 500 brand new health reports that none of those ancestry companies give you. What we do is we take your raw DNA and we feed it into an advanced AI built by 65 scientists and engineers, and expand it from the usual 600,000 markers to over 200 million genetic variants, which we analyze with 99.7% accuracy. Then we give you actual answers instead of just ancestry pie charts, which are interesting, but probably not life-changing. What does that mean specifically? Well, it means that you'll discover exactly which vitamins and minerals you're genetically wired to run low on. Things like magnesium, zinc, B12, folate, vitamin D, iron, omega-3s. We actually cover all the essential amino acids and essential fats too. So no more buying lots of supplements hoping they'll make a difference. You can actually find out which ones you're most likely to actually need. You'll see your personal risk scores for the real root causes everyone's talking about these days. Things like chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, blood sugar swings, visceral fat, hardening arteries, and yes, some of the genetics that are most commonly talked about as well, like MTHFR, ApoE, and COMT. And most importantly, you'll see exactly what to do about each one, with recommendations for changes of lifestyle, diet, and supplements. You'll find out why caffeine may be wrecking you, or maybe why you can drink 6 espressos and have no problem, sleep like a baby right afterwards. You'll get a full hormone and neurotransmitter profile. Which of your testosterone, cortisol, dopamine, oxytocin, estrogen, all these things are most likely to be out of balance, so you can stop wasting your money testing the wrong things. You'll even get fitness reports to find out whether you're genetically built for endurance or power, what your VO2 max potential is likely to be, your risk for tendon injury, back injury, all these kind of things, so you can finally train the way your body was actually designed. And every single recommendation, dietary changes, supplements, lifestyle tweaks, is scored from 1 to 5 on impact and evidence. So basically what that means is you know exactly where to start, what's the most important thing to do without getting overwhelmed. Try it now. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com. If you have an old DNA file, you can upload it and you have your first reports within hours. If you don't, then make sure to select the DNA kit option and we'll send you a DNA kit. You take a saliva sample. It's really easy. Advanced Health Genetics is already by far the most affordable DNA reporting company of its kind. But if you use the code rejuvenate at checkout, that's rejuvenate, you get an additional 20% off your order. Click the link in the description, the pinned comment, wherever you see it, or just type in your browser advancedhealthgenetics.com. Do it now while it's fresh in your mind, because the version of you 6 months from now is going to thank you for not putting this off anymore.
No, I mean, you've made a really great point there about satiation. I think that is something that's highly overlooked, especially when people are so focused on that they have weight to lose and that they want to lose weight, so that they then put themselves in that place, as we've talked about previously, deprivation, starvation, or anything like that, and which you've gone through, which thank you for doing that, is that the body is going to rebel, the mind's going to rebel, we're going to bounce back, and we're most likely going to be in a worse place than we were before. But what you were just saying there is like making sure that you are satiated and eating that to, find what your calorie needs are a day. I mean, I think there's enough information out there for people to find that. I don't know if you want to quickly go over that before we go into the next bit, and then they can do the math themselves, or at least they should be able to.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one. You can definitely, just looking at it in my local area today, you can go out to a clinic and they'll do like a resting metabolic rate kind of measurement of you, which is not super expensive, and give you a very precise figure based on your body type. But even the kind of levels given in any kind of online calculator or any kind of wearable, in my experience, are not too far off if people actually stick to them. I kind of like the wearable because it tracks, there's variation. I mean, some people are very rigid in their routines, but a lot of people are, more variable. And so, if you're walking 10,000 steps, more a day than you usually do, or, the days where you do go to the gym and work out half an hour versus days that you don't, and all the rest of it, the wearables will keep track of that. And they'll say, and this is quite important, I would say, to account for that variance, because, if you're eating exactly the same thing every day, you might find you really struggling the days that you go to the gym. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, because, and it depends what you're doing at the gym, but let's say you really do go for it, you're probably going to need 500 calories more those days. And if you don't account for that and you're having exactly the same, those can be the days when you're really starting to struggle. Maybe your blood sugar drops, and maybe this, maybe that. So yeah, I would say ideally, to answer your question, Chrissy, some kind of, going somewhere where they do those precise, measurements on you, maybe with more advanced technology, but then also taking that into account and using your wearable, or even just your phone. You don't have to have a wearable. Generally, your phone, although it's not ideal, it will keep track of how many steps you're walking, unless you specifically tell it not to. So you can just look at it and see, okay, have I been more active today, and make kind of a rough calculation. But yeah, ideally, some kind of fitness tracker, wearable, whatever you want to call them, is great. But some people don't like them, then that's fine. Then you can kind of just calculate it more manually and go, okay, I went to the gym and this is the activity I did, and according to online, that that burns an extra 200 calories or whatever, and I'm going to account for it.
Okay, no, that's really good. So yeah, that just helps give just a little bit of an idea if somebody's completely new and they're just hearing this for the first time. Right. So,
and I know some people don't like that, like it's too specific and technical and mathematical and whatever. But I have to say, like, the people who are successful, this is the level that they are actually getting into. And to the people who are like, oh, why can't you just listen to your body? And where has that got you? Unfortunately,
listening to this podcast.
Yeah, it's probably got you to the point where you're searching far and wide for ways to try and lose weight, right? So this is the thing. We talked about you can't always trust your body. We give an example there of the leptin thing, right? Your body says, I'm not satiated yet, even when it should be saying that, because there's this problem with this feedback loop with this specific hormone. There's a bunch of different things like that. And so unfortunately, we can't always listen to our body. Now, doesn't mean you have to wear the wearable forever or do the calculations forever. After a while, you will get like a sense of it and a feel of it, and you won't need to do it anymore. But it's something to do temporarily while you're kind of learning what is and isn't appropriate.
Okay, no, that's really good. All right, so is it time to dive in?
Yes. So I'll just give a couple of caveats first. We're going to give a couple of specifically if you have this hormonal imbalance types at the end. But just before I go into any other general recommendations, first of all, like, be aware that this is weight optimization dietary suggestions. It's not dietary suggestions for if you have a specific digestive issue. It's not dietary suggestions for if you have some kind of autoimmune disease. It's not dietary suggestions for if you have, some kind of inflammatory condition, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Meaning, like, I realize some of what I'm going to say is not universally applicable, and that's fine. That's absolutely, the way it is. But generally what I found is those people who really struggle with losing weight, they often have those issues less than average. Generally, I was someone who's thin my whole life until recently. Now I guess I just average weight. But whenever I found someone with who is like overweight and we talked about it, I was always like, because my underweightness is due to digestive problems primarily. And I was like, if I eat like you, I wouldn't get fat. I would get sick. Like, I can't, my digestion couldn't handle it. So sometimes people overweight get digestive problems. I think the most common thing is like acid reflux, kind of indigestion, those kind of stomach problems, which a lot of the time is just like just sheer kind of the weight pressing on the stomach, to be honest. And, when it's really advanced and, they may well have serious inflammatory problems and all the rest of it. But I'd say in the interim, especially people who only have a moderate amount of weight increase, generally their digestion is usually very good. And so some of the things that I'll be recommending here, I know some people say, oh, I don't agree with that. But that's generally people who have more delicate digestions who have to be more careful with what they eat. So I just want to give that caveat. Now, despite that, let's start with a couple of don'ts, and then we'll get into the do's. So the first thing I would say is don't eat obvious junk. What is obvious junk? Because this is I'm not talking about carbs or, whatever you heard. Some people say are good, some people say are bad. I'm not talking about that yet. I'm just saying the stuff that everyone agrees is bad. I'm saying, if you're buying food in a packet or maybe from a restaurant and you look at the ingredients, because I think depending on what country you are in, usually these days they have to tell you what's in there, with the ingredients because of allergy stuff. So if you request it, even in a restaurant, certainly fast food place, usually stuff like that, off the menu, they will give you the ingredients of it because they have to for you to check for allergens. If there's a bunch of stuff in there that you don't even know what it is, that's something that I would say to avoid. That doesn't mean you can't have that thing necessarily. That's a different conversation. You just can't have that version of that thing. So it doesn't mean you can't have a cheeseburger and fries. It just means you can't have the McDonald's version of cheeseburger and fries or whatever, right? Like, it doesn't even mean, I don't know, that you can't have a donut. That's a conversation. It means that you can't have a Dunkin' donut, like, doesn't mean that you can't have a chocolate treat, but you can't have a, I don't know, Mars bar, whatever it might be. Like, because those things are generally the worst version of those foods. And the thing that makes them worse, it's arguable, debatable. Is sugar really bad? Is chocolate really bad? Are potatoes really bad? Is cheese really bad? Etc. But what we can all agree with is all the chemicals that they put in there, the preservatives, the coloring, the additives, the flavor enhancers. There are a few exceptions, like occasionally when you look at those E numbers and you actually look it up and it's just like vitamin C or something like that, that actually does happen. And so if you want to be really pedantic, you can look up what those things are and go, oh, I have heard of that. It's actually all right. And maybe let yourself have it. But the vast majority of the time, especially if you're in the US, to be honest, where they really, I don't know, they're talking about changing it. I haven't been following exactly. I wanted to do a news show, but it was just too much work, honestly, with everything else I have to do. So I'm not up on all the what changes they have made, if any, but they just allow a lot in some countries compared to others. And the US certainly allows a lot of really bad additives. So That's a minimum. Now, I realize there may be a bunch of terrible things in there that they don't list on the label. I get that. But what I'm saying is, if they list it on the label, just don't eat it. And it doesn't mean you can't have whatever that food is if you love it, if it's the only thing that satisfies you, blah, blah, blah. But just don't have that version of it that's full of chemicals. There must be a non-full of chemicals version that you can find somewhere, or maybe make for yourself, or maybe persuade someone else to make for you. So that's the first thing. No chemicals. Why? These things are generally, obviously, bad for you, which is why I'm bringing this up. But what does bad for you actually mean? A lot of the time, they are inflammatory. The more inflamed you are, the harder it is to lose weight. A lot of the time, they are hormone dysregulating. And things that are hormone dysregulating are definitely going to be a challenge when it comes to losing weight. A lot of the time, for instance, like artificial sweeteners, for instance. Use this as an example because a lot of people are, drinking, I don't know, diet soda rather than normal soda because they think it's healthier and it's helping them lose weight. The thing is, those artificial sweeteners in there are actually dysregulating the insulin system often more than if it were just sugar. So this is a real challenge. And sugar, as problematic as it is, especially for some people, at least it has some benefit, like your body can turn it into fuel. Aspartame or whatever, sucralose, all these kind of things, there's no benefit. Your body can't turn it into anything. It can only process it and try its best to excrete it. So please avoid the chemicals. That's the first thing. Second thing, avoid anything that you are allergic or intolerant to. I say this, I see this all the time. People kind of work out that they have this issue with various things. Now, as I said, this is more common among my, having lots of chronic diseases, not, for a very long time audience than it is for the people who are trying to optimize weight audience, because the two are not always the same, admittedly. But some of you still who are only interested in losing weight, you have some food allergies, you have some food intolerances. And if and when you do, when you eat these things anyway, even if I suggested it or some other health teacher or your fitness trainer or your best friend who's much thinner than you, they eat it, like whatever reason you might think it's a good idea, if it's something that your body has an immune reaction to, it's a bad idea. We have to understand that when we eat something that we are actually intolerant to or allergic to, it's like the body is acting to it as if it's a poison or as if it's an infection. And so what that means is it's a really big deal. Like the inflammatory response to it is a really big deal. And for some people that creates symptoms that are more obvious, blocked nose and digestive discomfort and itching skin and red skin, all that kind of thing. But for some people, it doesn't show up in those kind of ways. And it maybe shows up as inflammation in the brain. It makes you feel depressed and sad. Or it shows up as inflammation of the pancreas, and it starts to, you start to find it more difficult to regulate sugar. So it shows up as, inflammation in the liver, which is something that we don't really notice, but also starts to affect our weight over time as we develop kind of a fatty liver potentially. So, just because you don't notice it in an obvious way like some people do, doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. So, working out which foods you're intolerant to or allergic to, if any, and don't have them, even if people are recommending them. Now, how to deal with that? Do you have to stop having them forever? Not necessarily, quite probably not. That's a different conversation from a different episode. I'm just saying, if you already know, then don't have them. And then, yep.
No, I was going to say too, I mean, I know as well within the genetic reports that we can have things like I have a thing for gluten, so I do try and stay away from it. Now I haven't gone out and have the further testing done, but I try and be aware of those bodies. So if you find potentially testing hard, what I was suggesting is if you have access to those DNA reports, that might be a helpful insight. Doesn't necessarily mean you have it, but it could be insightful.
Yeah, that's a great starting point for trying to work it out. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, gluten is a classic one in terms of weight. It's I think gluten and dairy probably, for different reasons, are classic ones that can make it difficult to lose weight. Not for everyone, but for the people who have issues with them, which is quite a lot of people. Okay, so then we're finally onto, okay, those are the things, like the main things to always avoid. So no matter what, no matter what guru says what, no matter what your ancestors did, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can ignore all that and throw it out the window if it is accompanied by a load of toxic ingredients that you don't even know what they are, or if it's something that your immune system reacts to. Then it's just not worth having those things. All right. Hopefully that still leaves you a lot of options. So what next? Well, the big challenge to me, and it's not particularly easy about really being successful with this satiation thing, is so there's a few different dynamics to it. First of all, you need enough of all three macronutrients to feel satiated. I'll give the overview first, then we'll dig into each one. You need enough of all three. Notice I said that. So again, this distinction between feeling full versus feeling satiated. One of the more common dietary advice is like really load up on protein because then you're not hungry. It's true that that doesn't work by the mechanism of just filling your stomach, and that is quite effective at getting people to eat less. It's also true to say that a very large amount of protein is actually quite a struggle for your body to deal with. It's the least clean burning of the three types of fuel sources. Let's put it that way. Carbohydrates and fat are much more clean burning. Burning protein as a primary fuel source, it has a lot of nitrogen byproduct, which is a struggle for your body, for your kidneys especially. I'm not, being too extreme with this. Like, I realize some people are just fine, depending on a bunch of different factors, genetic factors, like how strong they are, their various organs, all the rest of it. But overall, what I'm saying is the thing that I see a lot of, say, having 40% of your calories come from protein, and then you're already on a caloric deficit, then you're not getting very many proteins come from carbohydrates and fat put together, which your body can actually easily convert into fuel. And it's just a struggle in your body. So it's another way of feeling full without being fulfilled. Because I can bet you, sure, if you're on a, let's say, even the amount that I recommend, a 300 calorie deficit, but you're having 40% of calories come from protein consistently every day, eventually you will find yourself binging on fat, carbs, both, almost certainly, because like the body's just, oh my God, just give me a source of fuel that I can easily deal with, and there's different reasons why it wants carbs and it prefers fat, but that's a perfectly legitimate one, right? Like, they are much easier for your body to turn into fuel versus protein.
Yeah, I want to just make a point to that, because since we had that last discussion on one of the previous episodes, I can't exactly remember, but when I've really been diving deeper in now into my macros and moving some of the protein over to my carbs in my beans and my lentils and my hummus, and I am feeling a little bit more satiated.
Excellent.
It's really quite good. I've been doing that over the last was about a week, 10 days, something like that. So I have noticed a difference.
And I will say, I say that first as a caveat, but the general, again, mainstream dietary advice of making sure you're having enough protein is super, super important, super true as well. The number one mistake that I see people make more often in the general world, I see my clients, because my clients are often quite high level and they're really trying to do their best, like you, Chrissy. But people who are more just like average, they're not having enough protein. And that's one of the main reasons why they're overeating, because their body is actually starving for protein. And so they're eating more, but they're eating the wrong thing. So the protein requirement kind of varies. Actually, I was going to do the overview. Let me do the overview first. Sorry, that was my fault. And then we'll go back to the macronutrients. Okay, so to be truly satiated, what do we need? Number one, we need the correct balance of macronutrients. Number two, we need adequate levels of most, if not all, of the micronutrients. And number three, we need it in a form that actually is enjoyable and tastes good. That's the primary thing. Now, there is also an issue of timing. And honestly, when I talk about food and diet and losing weight, I usually talk about timing first and primarily. But in this case, it kind of varies a bit by hormonal type. So we'll actually leave that conversation. So when you eat is really important as well. But I promise this episode is going to be about what you eat, so I'll stick to that primarily. So, three things: balance of macronutrients, adequacy of micronutrients, and then enjoyability are the three key factors that I see. Tell me if I've left anything out, Chrissy. Do you think there's anything else that's required, like to feel satiated by your food?
No, because I think you've stated it previously, which is making sure that you're getting enough. It's like, yeah, sure, you could have the balance of the macros and the micros and you could enjoy the food, but maybe you're just not having enough full fuel.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's the only thing.
So, yeah, balance and adequacy of macronutrients. The only reason I didn't say adequacy is because I've already kind of said like the 200 to 300 calorie deficiency. But yes, absolutely. I see people all the time having a lot more of deficit. I see people all the time having more of a deficit than that and thinking that they're doing great. But again, sooner or later, they tell me, I binged on ice cream. I went into the McDonald's, whatever. It's because for that point that you just made there, like you need to have an adequate amount of macronutrients. And the reason I focus more on balance though than adequacy as well is you need adequate amounts of each macronutrient. And that's the thing that most people struggle to get their heads around. So to go back to that dietary advice we talked about earlier, is there anything wrong with having 40% of calories come from protein, especially if you're already in a caloric deficit? I mean, that's debatable. Certainly if you have weak kidneys, it's not a great idea, but it's probably actually fine. Like it's, again, there's a lot of arguments in the biochemical world about this, but probably in most cases, that 40% of protein is not going to stress your kidneys too much. It's not a big deal. The biggest problem to me is more that the 60% that's left, it's not going to be enough carbs and fat to make you satiated. That's more the issue to me. And so how much, I'll talk about the amounts first, and then we'll talk about the types, like how to get them. I would say like 15% of calories coming from protein, if you're trying to lose weight, is not enough. I say it in that specific context. Maybe as a maintenance diet, it may be, especially as you're older. There is some evidence that suggests that eating excessive proteins, especially as you're older, is not helpful. And honestly, the people who live longest are not eating massive amounts of protein. So I don't want to say everyone has to have loads of protein, but I'll say if you're trying to lose weight, you need to make sure you're satiated, and you need to make sure you're getting enough protein while overall getting less calories. And so therefore your percentage of protein needs to be higher. I hope that makes sense. So basically you need kind of the same amount of protein if you're in a caloric deficit or not, perhaps even more to deal with various things, but certainly not less. And so you need a higher percentage if you're having less overall. So I would say, it has to be over 15%. 20%, 25% is usually the sweet spot for people who want to lose weight, healthfully and sustainably and feel satiated. Once you're up to 30, 35, it's kind of pushing it a little bit, but certainly that's, every now and then, one day or whatever, it's totally fine. It does depend on your genetics. This is one of the things, again, if you look at your advanced health genetics reports, some people do well with protein, some people don't. That's going to change it a little bit as well, like how much, but it's going to change it by like 5%, something like that. It's still not going to make a massive difference. So that's why I'd say the sweet spot is about 20 to 25%. Now, next there's carbs and fat. So I think we all probably know, watching this with a pretty sophisticated audience, that if you have a really low amount of carbs or fat, it is easier to lose weight. So it's really easy to lose weight if you don't eat, but I've already talked about all the problems with that. But I'll admit it right now, it's easier to lose weight if you have very little or even, pretty much none of either carbohydrates or fat. The challenge is, well, let's talk about why. So why is it easier? Because as I said, protein is generally not going to be your primary fuel source. It shouldn't be, because it's not clean burning. So you're left with either carbs or fat as your options. If you only basically limit yourself to one of those two, it's pretty difficult to overdo one without the other. Those of us, keto is pretty popular these days. I think a lot of people losing weight have at least tried it. And if you're not eating carbs, if you're only eating protein and fat, it's pretty difficult to overeat it. Like, a lot of people just feel sick, especially if your liver is not, super well functioning, if it doesn't produce a lot of bile, if it's cholestatic, maybe, if the bile is not flowing properly, and you're having, 500, 600, 700 calories of fat in a meal. And I do encourage you to have a meal and not snacks. We'll get to that. That's a lot of fat. And that leaves a lot of people feeling, certainly that's enough, and maybe that's too much, right? That's one of the challenges you'll see, in the keto community. It's like, oh, how do you handle all this fat to begin with? Like, it's hard to have that much fat. Less common, but still, existing, is it's actually difficult to have that much carbohydrate as well, without any fat. The thing about fat is it's very condensed. You can get a lot of calories in a small amount of space. I suppose technically you can get condensed carbs as well, but condensed carb would be what? Plain white sugar or honey, maple syrup, something like that. But a condensed fat would be like an oil or a butter or something. There's still 2.25 times as much calories per gram in the condensed fat than the condensed carb. And most of us are not going to be having white sugar or honey as our primary carbs. We're probably going to be having cooked grains or cooked beans or fruits, or cooked root vegetables, all of which have quite a lot of water along with the carbohydrate. So basically, for instance, I was friends for a while, I was in the raw vegan phase of my life, with a bunch of fruitarians. All they'd have is fruit. They would be eating fruit all day, every day, like literally throughout the day, all day, to try and keep up with their caloric needs. And you know what? None of them are overweight. So this idea, everyone lost weight. In fact, there's stories in the news. If you ever hear of a fruitarian dying as a result of their diet, it's always emaciation, not obesity. Like it's very hard to be overweight if all you're eating is this very high carbohydrate diet. So it's very hard to be overweight if you're basically leaving out one of the two primary calorie sources. To me, that's a lot of people have very convoluted theories about why carbs or fat are a better fuel source based on their observation that when they leave out the other one of like how much weight they lose. And obviously when you do lose weight, there are a lot of health benefits to that. But to me, it's really ultimately doesn't need to be made any more complicated than that. And the reason it doesn't need to be made any more complicated, even though there is more to it, is this. Because it's rarely sustainable. You can rarely do it long term. Eventually, your body's going to start craving carbs, or your body's going to start craving fat. Now, the pro-fat people will say, like, you don't need carbs. There's no essential nutrients in carbs. There are essential fats. And, there's fat-soluble vitamins, which need fat in order to be absorbed. So, yeah, and there is an argument to that. But the bottom line is, for both types, it's very hard to stick to, and most people don't. And even the influencers, teachers, whatever, who are telling you to do it, either they're not sticking to it themselves 100%, or they tell you how hard it is to stick to. And so to me, that's not a sustainable situation. If your whole online persona and identity is about, I only eat fruit, or I only eat keto, or whatever it might be, I only eat carnivore, I only eat carbs, but you're admitting to yourself how hard it is. There's a lot of, carnivore was a thing for a while. A lot of people who were carnivore influencers have stopped, to their credit, and a lot of the stopping is, I introduced carbs back in. Oh, well, what a surprise. It's like, really, it's not sustainable to miss out, completely leave out one of the two main calorie sources over the course of years. And you could say to me, Elwin, what about blah, blah, blah? I know that there are always exceptions, and some of them are lying, but some of them are not. And I don't know who's who. I know some of them. I'm not going to tell you, because I've been behind the scenes of the health world for 15 years, and I'm not going to break any confidences, but I know some of them are lying. But I'm sure some of them aren't. Some of them are really sticking to it. But these are just the outliers. There are people who, and some of them are influencers, but some of them aren't. Some perfectly normal people who have cured all these diseases eating 100% fruit, and perfectly normal people who are cured all these diseases eating just meat or whatever. I believe it, absolutely. But the thing is, the majority of people, they find it very difficult to stick to the medium to long term. And when you actually look at, the community, the forums, the Facebook groups, the comment section, all the rest of it, there's not, all these people's, the primary conversation is not about how great this is. The primary conversation is, it's not working for me, And then there's other people, you've got to stick with it, or try this instead, change this, And depending on how policed the group is, then people are like, you're not doing it right, it's your fault, which I hate. But yeah, basically, it's not sustainable for a lot of people. I would say the vast majority, but I guess that's debatable, but certainly the majority. So for most of us, if it's going to be sustainable, we have to have some protein, but also some carbs and some fat. And so then the question is, how much of each? And what type? We'll get into what type in a minute. But in terms of how much, this varies. And again, the genetics are a helpful starting point, especially with the carbohydrates. There are some people who are just like more recently hunter-gatherer adapted, and hunter-gatherers generally would have less carbohydrates, except for maybe if they came from equatorial regions, but overall. And then there are some people who came from more agrarian ancestors. We have had agriculture for at least tens of thousands of years that we're aware of, and they are just more adapted to having a higher carbohydrate diet. They're famously, for instance, the Native Americans in North America were really not adapted to a lot of carbohydrates, and this is why, when they were introduced to large amounts, they had massive incidence of diabetes and alcoholism, because their body their genetics had not adapted to carbohydrates. And when they started to have more than a small amount of them, they really suffered for it, basically. That's one famous example, maybe a lot of people have heard of culturally. But there's a lot of people that may apply to. Certainly, if you're 100% Native American, you probably shouldn't be having a high carbohydrate diet. But for the rest of us, where it may not be as obvious, this is where it's really good to get your genetic results and find out. So the carbohydrates are usually the starting place to me for this. If you are adapted to potentially a high levels of carbohydrates for your genetics, then again, that still doesn't mean you should go all carb, but that means that you can have a higher ratio. So again, if you were to say 20% protein, let's go for that. Maybe 50% carbs. And then again, you're almost, so far anyway, we're going to obviously go into this more, but you're almost in line with the kind of classic food pyramid from mainstream science, God forbid, but some people, they can fit into that, and that's actually okay for them, right? And then maybe 30% from fat. Obviously, we want to get better fats. We'll talk about that next. And that's good for them. Some people, they're different. Hannah, my wife, who I don't know, was going to be on the show by now. Maybe she will have been, maybe she won't. But, she's going to share how she went from pre-diabetic to optimal levels of insulin, and also, lost a substantial amount of weight, literally within like 4 to 5 weeks. And, she did it by following all the advice that I give. But after not having followed my advice for a while for various reasons, she was moving and traveling and this, that, and the other. But anyway, in her genetics, she just has a hunter-gatherer genetic. Carbohydrates do not suit her. So yes, she did do a bunch of different things. She did not stop eating carbohydrates. I did not say go ketogenic, even though she has that genetic. I just said go less and go less high glycemic. That's all. And that was enough for her to, as I say, turn from insulin 15 to insulin 3 in like 4 to 5 weeks. It was a massive shift. So just to say, you don't have to do the extreme stuff that a lot of these other influencers say necessarily. You just got to, do the right thing. And so in this case, for her, the right thing was from, going maybe eating a lot of high glycemic carbs, and probably too many, because that, unfortunately, the problem, when you are less adapted to carb, you crave carbs. That's why it may have seemed weird when I said, Native Americans are more prone to diabetes and alcoholism. Unfortunately, when you're not good at handling carbs, you actually generally want more. You tend to be addicted to them. So she just had to go to a moderate level of moderate glycemic carbs and turned it around very easily. It's not always so easy for people. It depends what other factors are going on, but it's a case study. It's an example of how easy it at least can be if you just do the right thing. And anyway, for her, I did not say go zero carbs. I didn't even say go 10% carbs. I think she went to like 30%, like something like that. It wasn't like crazy low. It was just, and so in both instances, so maybe, 20% protein, some 30-50, like that would be the spread usually. Is it 30% carbs up to 50% carbs? Is it 30% fat up to 50% fat? It's not that extreme. Maybe you might want to stretch that if you're really sure that one of those fuel sources doesn't suit you. Maybe it's like 55% fat, 25% carbs, the reverse. But I generally wouldn't go more extreme than that in most cases. Like that, it's really not such a big difference in terms of, but it's a massive difference in the impact it has on you. But what I mean is the difference between someone who really does well with carbs and difference between someone who really doesn't is not as extreme as most of the other health teachers out there are teaching. You just go from a, moderately large amount to a moderately small amount. It's basically as simple as that. And then, what types? So with protein, all right. Remember I said there's 3 things. So there is macronutrient balance, and enough of them. There is getting enough micronutrients balance, but we don't need to worry about that, at this level. And then there is taste. If you're eating clean, exercising, and your belly fat just won't shift, listen up. The number one cause for this happening is insulin resistance. It's the number one hormonal imbalance, which explains why people in their 30s, 40s, and beyond just can't lose weight. I'm Owen Robinson, and together with Dr. Miriam Mikitsky, we created the Hormetic Weight Optimization Formula. Insulin is a key part of that. More and more people every year are being diagnosed with insulin resistance. It is the number one reason why people struggle to lose weight so much. And that's why we created the Insulin Balance Formula. It's our most popular formula. It contains precisely chosen quantities of berberine, fenugreek, zinc, and folate, which are all clinically studied ingredients shown to lower insulin, kill cravings, and turn your body from a fat storer to a fat burner. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/insulin, order now, and you'll be invited to join our clinical study the moment you check out at no extra cost, so you can track exactly how well and how effectively it works for you. Use code REJUVENATE as well to get 20% off. End the blood sugar roller coaster. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/insulin and use code REJUVENATE for 20% off now. Where are you getting your micronutrients from? It's hard to get sufficient micronutrients from foods that are generally considered to be carbs or fat primarily sources. There's sometimes there's quite a lot, but if on a day-to-day, everyday basis, you want to be getting enough micronutrients. The most micronutrient dense foods tend to be the foods that are called proteins, that, basically animal foods. And there's quite a difference between them. I was just looking up, someone else's guide who I listened to. I think they actually have it right again, and they were pointing out the same thing that I've pointed out numerous times of just how much more nutrients there are in, for instance, beef than chicken. Like, beef is higher in almost every micronutrient than chicken. Now, some people avoid it for that reason. People who have hemochromatosis maybe are worried about too much iron. There's definitely more iron in beef than chicken, but there's also more, B1, B2, beef. I won't go down the list. There's basically more, pretty much every nutrient in beef than there is in chicken. Now, I'm not picking on chicken. So in terms of like the order of things, the highest, most nutrient dense protein sources are going to be your ruminant red meat, which is your grass eating, basically, red meat. So beef, lamb, venison, deer, bison, if you want to put them in a separate category from cows, pretty similar nutritionally. And then the other category would be certain seafoods, and basically, the fatty fish, and to some degree, the shellfish. All of those maybe can be problematic in various ways, which, give an example, I guess, with a specific instance with the beef. The shellfish can often be contaminated because they are bottom dwellers with various different toxins which are in the sea. Fatty fish as well with toxins in the sea. But, ruminants as well can be contaminated. All animal food can be contaminated, and often it's more contaminated than plant food because animals concentrate. Animals concentrate nutrients and animals concentrate toxins. So because they're eating, to create an animal, there's a lot of plant food that's gone into it in general. All the animals eating other animals. Eventually, someone's eating plants, and so it's just all concentrated. This is why generally, even though I just said fatty fish, I would not recommend large fatty fish like tuna, because the tuna are eating smaller fish and they're eating smaller fish, and so it's so concentrated that they have really high amounts of mercury. Like a tuna might have 1,000 times as much mercury as, for instance, a sardine. And so a small fatty fish, like a sardine, like a herring, like a pilchard, anything like that, would be in the category of what I would call elite nutrition, and kind of lean, depending on your fat requirements. But let's just say as a protein source, a lean red meat would also be optimal when it comes to a protein source. A lot of people love eggs. They kind of put eggs forward. Egg yolks, admittedly, are fairly nutritionally dense, but egg yolks I would consider more of a fat source than a protein source. The actual protein part of the eggs is more the whites, which is very low in nutrients and actually has an anti-nutrient there, which stops you absorbing biotin, which is B7. If it's raw, sorry, not in general, only if it's raw. But a lot of people who are having a lot of egg whites for protein, they're having them raw, which is why I mention it. So yeah, eggs, good source of protein, like very easily digestible protein and all the rest of it. But here's the thing. I don't really believe in and use protein powders all that anymore. The stuff about the heavy metal contamination in them is worrying, but the problem to me really is this. Like, your body can only handle a certain amount of protein. I want to get as much nutrition as possible with my protein, right? That's the thing. Now, there's also dairy. Dairy is very high in, again, very well-absorbed proteins. Again, assuming you don't have an allergy to it. Obviously, we already discussed that earlier, so I hope I don't have to keep giving that caveat to remind people. But it's, got a highly absorbed version of protein, often beloved by, bodybuilders and even athletes for the reason of being very good for putting on muscle, kind of anabolic. But it's a bit deficient in micronutrients. It specifically is high in calcium, very high in calcium, much higher than pretty much anything else, certainly in absorbable calcium. So there are some foods like green leaves, like spinach, which are also high in calcium, but they also have oxalic acid, which makes the calcium like not absorbable actually within the digestive tract. So there is no better form of actually bioavailable calcium than dairy. And so that's, to me, is the primary argument for dairy. It's also the other stuff that's maybe in it, like, lactoferrin and immunoglobulins and stuff like that if you're having it raw. There's things like vitamin K2 and bifidobacteria if you're having it fermented. But just your pure dairy, your pure milk, for instance, the primary thing that it has going for it, micronutrient-wise, is calcium. So I do not consider dairy to be an adequate primary protein source. I would consider it more of an adjunct protein, usually stroke fat source. In fact, I put it more in the fats category, even if you're talking about, cheese. I mean, obviously skim milk is not, but, skim milk, again, it's not going to be high in many micronutrients other than calcium. So that's the main animal. And I've talked about poultry already. Poultry, not bad, higher than a lot of the plant sources of protein in terms of micronutrients, but just not as high as the elite sources. It's kind of in the middle. And then, nuts and seeds are quite high in a bunch of different micronutrients, to be honest. B1, for instance, which is kind of hard to get enough B1 from your diet. There's several nuts, macadamias, almonds maybe, that are pretty high in it. Like zinc, very hard to get enough of that in the diet in general, and especially from plant foods, but it's pretty high in pumpkin seeds. So nuts and seeds actually do okay with micronutrients, okay to good. The thing is, there's a lot of fats in all nuts and seeds, and often it's, with the exception of macadamia nuts, it's not very good fats. It's omega-6 fats, which tend to slow down metabolism. That's the very simple reason that you wouldn't want to have a lot of them if you're trying to lose weight. And there's a bunch of other reasons why you wouldn't want to as well, which are becoming more known these days. I think seed oil dangers are talked about a lot, but the same type of fat in seeds is in nuts. Nuts are slightly better profile, but nuts also have more fats than seeds on average. And basically it's a fat source, not a protein source, unless you make a protein powder out of it. And even then, I notice they often leave a bunch of other stuff in. Like your hemp protein powder still has quite a lot of fiber and carbs and other stuff, whereas like your whey protein powder is pretty much just protein. Anyway, not a great source of micronutrients per calorie. That's the only problem with nuts and seeds. Then there is grains and beans. And grains and beans, to me, can be a good source. So grains, obviously. Some grains are very low in protein, like corn or rice. But some are quite high, like wheat. Wheat is like 25% protein per 100 grams. That's as high as beef, So I got to include wheat and some of the other grains as a protein source because it'd be dishonest not to. Ditto with beans, often 25, 30 grams of protein. The challenge is, for every 1 part protein, they have 2 to 3 times at least as much carbs. And so to me, that makes them more a carb source with some additional protein rather than a protein source. So, good as a carb source, maybe, when we talk about carbs, but not a protein source primarily. So, yeah, I know this is challenging for vegetarians, and it's, to be honest, it's a good reason not to be a vegetarian, is this micronutrient issue, or to supplement. You can get enough of all these nutrients, so that B vitamins and zinc and carnosine and choline and all these things that are not sufficient from plant foods, usually, plant diets usually, but then you have to supplement a bunch of different things. But I'm talking about, feeling satiated just from the food in this episode. So really, red meat, or if you are more the vegetarian type, who red meat is just, then we're looking at fish, and we're looking at small fatty fish and shellfish to get your nutrient-dense micronutrients. Okay, then let's do fat next, because fat is pretty easy. I would recommend for weight loss, primarily more saturated fat, but specifically coconut fat. I know that's very specific. There's all the types of fat out there. It is the one that's the most pro-metabolic. It's going to speed up your metabolism. It's also the one that has a high level of MCTs, which don't require as much processing by the liver, so they're not as much of a strain on the liver in order to turn into fuels. But basically, your body can turn some of it straight into ketones, which are a form of energy. So it's a more easily turned into a usable form of energy straight away. But the main thing is that coconut oil of all the fats, has the most strongly pro-metabolic effect, meaning getting your body to burn more calories. And then I'd say out of all the fats, the very worst is soy oil, which has the most anti-metabolic effect. It has the tendency to make your body burn less calories. Soy oil has a lot of omega-6s, so all of the omega-6s are in that category, really. Rapeseed oil, which you guys in America call canola, and sunflower oil, and all of these kind of, and yes, even the ones that are supposed to be healthy, like hemp seed oil, flaxseed oil, they all have quite a lot of omega-6s in them, although those two less than the others. But all of these slow down the metabolism. They are anti-metabolic. Now, the kind of saturated fats that are found with animal food, they are overall, also more pro-metabolic, but, they do contain higher levels of something called arachidonic acid, which is, an inflammatory anti-metabolic to some degree. So even though and it depends on the type, but this is, I didn't mention pork earlier, but nutritionally I put pork with poultry, similar, less than the red meats. So the red meats have less of the arachidonic acid. They have less of the bad fats than chicken and pork. And this is another reason that, I prefer the red meats for you as a meat eater over chicken and pork. Other than the high levels of micronutrients, is the lower levels of omega-6. And to be honest, lower levels of the worst omega-6s, which is arachidonic acid, which is the most inflammatory type of omega-6. Your body can make its own arachidonic acid out of seed oils, that is true, but with the animal, it's already done it for you. So it's already made the worst type of omega-6 for you. So you really, ideally don't want to have a large amount of that in your diet. And so, chicken fat, duck fat, pork fat, I would not recommend really for that reason. Now, it does vary. Like if you're having a wild boar that's eating a genuinely wild diet, they're probably going to have just as low levels of that as, or not maybe just as low, but almost as low as like a cow or a sheep. But the normal pork or poultry that people actually eat is quite high in it. So probably the order would be coconut oil and MCT oils, number one. Dairy is an interesting one because it has high levels of something called odd-chain fatty acids, which also have numerous different health benefits. Margaric acid and pentadecoic acid, which are very interesting, which are also found in oily fish. So there was some speculation that a lot of the benefits of oily fish that we thought were down to omega-3s are actually down to the odd-chain fatty acids. I don't know for sure. I haven't looked into it enough. But I do know that dairy would be high on my list for that reason, along with potentially not like buying fish oil from a store, but like actually eating fish. That would be like high in that category as well. And so coconut oil, maybe the other saturated fat from plants. There's really not many, but macadamia nut would be one example again. Then we'd be talking about our dairy fat, along with our red meat and oily fish fat. We could maybe put them all roughly in the same category, and then they would all be fine. Then we're talking about our monounsaturated fat, also fine. And for some people, they just handle it better. There's a genetic component to that. So like your olive oil, your avocado oil, if it's genuine, or your actual olives and your actual avocados, they're mainly fat. That would be, also okay fats to lose weight on, okay to good. They're not, they still have some omega-6s, so they're a little bit anti-metabolic, so maybe not the ideal fat losing fats, but they are, especially like olive oil has a bunch of other nutrients in it. So that would maybe balance out that it's still worth having, even maybe as your primary fat source for some people. All of those are fine. The ones I'd recommend to not have are your, as I said, poultry and pork fats, your seed oils, your vegetable oils, and especially your soy oil.
Yeah, soy doesn't really have the best rap, does it? Or best reputation, I should say.
I mean, it's full of the omega-6s, but soy also has metabolic compounds in terms of things that slow thyroid function specifically. So it's even worse than the general omega-6s. It's got estrogenic compounds in. It's there was the studies where they fed animals primarily coconut oil, and they fed animals primarily soy oil. The animals that had primarily coconut oil lost weight even when they gave them a bunch of extra calories, and the ones that had soy oil not only gained weight but fattened up significantly, which is why they started feeding animals that would eat feed soy, primarily. It's one of the biggest crops in the world, and they kind of trying to shove it in all the food that we eat, admittedly, but they definitely shove it in the animals that we eat. And so this is why when I say red meat, we're really looking, and I said lean red meat, that's, really, it's the easiest way to get around this issue that if you're eating non-lean meat, the fat in them may well have come from being fattened up by some kind of seeds or soy. So if you're having lean red meat, it gets around that to a large degree. Obviously, ideally, you'd be having 100% grass-fed and organic red meat only.
Yeah, that's a good point, is making sure where that source is coming from. And because otherwise you think you're doing it, but like you said, we're ingesting what we're ingesting from that animal. So if you wouldn't eat it, you might want to make sure that the animal that you've got is on the same diet or eating to the way that you would want them to eat. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Whatever they're eating, you're eating. That's the bottom line.
All right. So this has been a really great overview for the proteins and the fats. Now we're going to dig into carbs.
Yeah. And I just want to say, I could do whole episodes on each of these. I think we have gone more into depth in it. This is kind of like a summary for people. And I realize, it's not very specific, right? I'm like, I like carbs and the red meat and fish and different people, different things will suit them, right? I'm just giving like a broad overview. Generally, I would say there is no one who wants to lose weight that I would recommend soy oil to. And I don't think there's anyone who wants to lose weight. I wouldn't say, it's a good idea to have at least some fat from coconut oil. So that's why I'm confident enough to put them in those extremes. But obviously, it is case by case, and everyone has to find what works for them. So speaking of which, I say that now because this one is the most case by case, I would say. I would say that there's two considerations primarily when it comes to carbs, assuming that the person does not have digestive issues. Digestive issues, they're most likely to come with carbs and then fiber as well, which we haven't gotten to. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate. Fiber is simply an indigestible type of carbohydrate, indigestible by you. So basically the way it works is if you can digest it, it's called carbohydrate. If you can't digest it, but the microbes inside you can, it's called soluble fiber. And if you can't digest it and the microbes inside you can't digest it, it's called insoluble fiber. That's how it breaks down. But they're all carbs. It's just, who can digest it. So when it comes to carbs and weight loss, the main thing that you want to look at is what micronutrients come with the carbs, just like we talked about with protein, and what is the glycemic index with the carbs. Those are really the two primary considerations to me. So probably the worst in this category, I would say, is actually, even though, again, it can be great for some people, like people with allergies, white rice. Because white rice is very high glycemic index, higher than sugar, and it is pretty much zero nutrients. Even brown rice, other than carbs. Even brown rice is not super high, but it has some. But yeah, so white rice, super high glycemic index, super low level of nutrients other than carbohydrates. So what would be the opposite of that? Well, I'd say probably, again, this is a little bit mainstream advice, but probably the high glycemic pulses, the low glycemic pulses, grains, and fruits. So that would be all beans are pulses. Is the technical term for beans, but it includes like chickpeas, peas, even. They would all be in the category of low glycemic, all of them. They're also all high levels of soluble fiber. And for that reason, again, as long as you don't have any digestive issues, they're a pretty good choice for people wanting to lose weight. Taste can be something. Some people hate the taste of them. Again, I'm not saying have just beans, right? We just talked about, having beef maybe or fish or whatever, but, beans can be part of it. Beans have a reasonable level of nutrients, although they do have a bunch of anti-nutrients as well that we have to consider. And they have not only do they have a good level of low glycemic carbs, but they also have a reasonable amount of protein in most cases. Probably black beans are often a favorite of my followers, and I know it's because it's like 2-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein, so it's quite a lot of protein. And they have a high level of pectin, which is a type of soluble fiber, which really helps in the detoxification process. But they have a bunch of other nutrients as well. And, in Chinese medicine, for instance, they often cook their herbs in black beans to kind of, boost the nutritional value of them. So, beans are a consideration. Fruit are another consideration. All fruit is not super high glycemic, with rare exceptions, because fructose itself, which is the primary fruit sugar, is low glycemic. But the problem is, especially in excess, it can put a strain on the liver, potentially. So, and again, there's a genetic component to that. There's also, but fruit would be in the category again of it has, a fair amount of micronutrients in it, just like pulses do. And it has a fair glycemic index profile. And so especially if we're talking about, the classic health advice, like eating blueberries, it's not bad advice. It's pretty low in glycemic index, and it's pretty high in nutrients. So that's, all the kind of berries in general, that would be an example. An apple, that would be an example. Orange, that would be an example. Very kind of standard fare. All of that can be a good source of carbohydrates as well. Grains, so corn and white rice are pretty high glycemic and pretty low in nutrients, especially white rice. But there are some grains which are good for nutrients, even wheat. If your body has no issue with it, it really can lead to digestive problems. So I rarely recommend it to everyone, but just if I'm being honest by my own criteria, if you have zero digestive issues, zero intolerance, allergy issues, then wheat is high protein, low glycemic, and fairly high in nutrition as carb sources go. So, other ones would be things like amaranth, quinoa, teff, millet to some degree, some of the more obscure grains, oats, in terms of more well-known ones. These are all like good potential carb sources as well. So those would be the primary ones I recommend. There is milk as well that has, lactose in it, which is a sugar. Again, if you digest it fine, it's moderate glycemic index. And if you're trying to up your calcium intake, which may be a good idea, because there really isn't, again, like I said earlier, there isn't very much in anything compared to how much there is in dairy of usable calcium. Then milk might be an option as well. So that would be carbs in a nutshell. And let's just talk about fiber quickly. So if we're looking at like a plate of someone trying to lose weight, doing it the most moderate way, what are we usually going to visualize in practice? We're going to visualize like a portion of animal protein, maybe chicken most commonly, but I've given my recommendations of what I'd replace that with. And then we're looking at like a portion of carbohydrates, maybe some quinoa, maybe some, beans, whatever. And then there's like a portion of vegetables and or salad, right? That's the classic weight loss meal if you look at it. And there's some validity to that. And, there's some salads and vegetables which are, not high in any of the macronutrients, but which are worth considering adding in because they've got a decent amount of micronutrients. They have a decent amount of soluble fiber as well. And again, if you don't have any digestive issues, having a bit of soluble fiber to feed your probably healthy microbiome, if you don't have any digestive issues, not probably, but quite possibly, could well be a good idea. So, a bit of green salad, a bit of some kind of vegetable. For some people, that's something to consider as well. It does give, like folate, for instance, vitamin B9 is often high in those kind of salady, vegetable-y kind of foods. And so, that's the other thing that you might want to consider to have adequate fiber. The other reason I recommend fiber, especially soluble fiber in this context, is, one of the things that can make it difficult to lose weight is excess estrogen. And while some people, may be taking binders and calcium glucarate and all the rest of it, and honestly, I hope you do, as part of my protocol, but I realize a lot of people just don't. And this episode is supposed to be dietary advice. And so probably the best thing you can get other than that is just to have a reasonable amount of soluble fiber to stop the estrogen and various other things being reabsorbed in the gut. So that's another reason why someone looking to lose weight especially with a food only approach, no supplements, no anything else, is definitely going to want to consider adding in some soluble fiber. And the last thing is also just, potentially for taste as well, which we're going to get into next. If you've ever said something like, I've tried everything to lose weight and nothing works, then this message is for you. Hi, I'm Owen Robinson here from the Rejuvenate podcast. Most people think that difficulty losing weight is about willpower or calories or exercise, and the truth is it's not. It's usually one or more of 5 hormonal imbalances that are blocking you losing weight. That's why Dr. Miriam Mikitsky and I created the Hormetic Weight Optimization System, a simple quiz that pinpoints your type, then matches you to the exact formula you need. Right now, we're launching the LEPTIN Balance Formula, and this is specifically formulated by Dr. Miriam and I, exactly for people who have this leptin resistance, which makes it very difficult for them to feel satiated by food. It's packed with African mango, Ceylon cinnamon, and alpha-lipoic acid, ingredients shown in numerous scientific studies to help your brain finally hear the I'm full, I'm satiated signal so you can stop thinking about food. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin, order now, and you'll be invited to join our clinical study the moment you check out. There's no cost for this, and you can track exactly how well it works for you, and you can get 20% off now by using code REJUVENATE at checkout. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin and use code REJUVENATE for 20% off now. You deserve to feel satiated again.
Let me ask you, because I know we looked at carbs and we looked at our percentages and things like that. Now, within fiber, is there a certain amount of grams per day somebody should be hoping to reach?
This is more controversial. Some people do great and feel best on 0 grams of fiber. This is often because they have some kind of suboptimal balance of their gut bacteria, and it's very common among the general population. but it's not necessarily the majority. That's what's more debatable. I don't know how many people, I don't know if anyone's tried to measure it, but let's say 50% of people actually feel better when they have less fiber. Fiber is not an essential nutrient. Just like actually no carbs are technically considered an essential nutrient, right? So again, what is fiber? Fiber is simply a type of carbohydrate that you can't digest, but the bacteria inside you can. Sorry, soluble fiber, insoluble fiber is a type of carbohydrate that no one, you or anything inside you, can digest. That's all it is. So no type of fiber, whether soluble, insoluble, or digestible, is considered essential, right? And so the amount that you need to live is zero. The amount that you need to be optimal is debatable. And so I think the primary thing that it comes down to is if you have an overall, and this is still very debated what the definition is, but just based on results, if you have an overall healthy balance of bacteria in your large intestine and minimal amounts of bacteria in the rest of your digestive tract, then more soluble fiber is probably better because it feeds those good bacteria, keeps them happy. They'll carry on processing toxins for you. They'll carry on creating nutrients for you. They create vitamin K2, they create some of the B vitamins, all kinds of stuff. However, if you've got a bad balance in there, even if it's not terrible, but like not enough of the good ones, it could be as simple as that. And I'm seeing that more and more. Like the more fiber just is more food, which creates more gas, which creates more inflammation and more problems. So it really is more case by case. And the microbiome, the organisms inside you, are the primary driver, is my understanding. And there's a whole school of thought, which is the less fiber, the better. And I think they are looking at people and themselves, especially, but cases in general of people who have bad balance of not necessarily terrible, but just not optimal balance of organisms inside them. And then, there's the more mainstream view that, low fiber is not good and you should have quite a lot. And they're generally looking at people where the bacterial balance is okay or good. And so it's very case by case. And so, I said beans, for instance, earlier, but I did give the caveat if you don't have digestive problems, because a lot of people when they start having beans, a lot of people when they start having nuts, which is another type of fiber, especially, or seeds, but especially nuts. A lot of people when they start having vegetables, especially the sulfurous ones like broccoli and cauliflower and all that kind of thing, they feel worse. They feel maybe gas, all kinds of digestive discomfort issues. And maybe they didn't realize they had a suboptimal balance of bacteria, but then when they start adding a lot more, especially soluble fiber, which feeds these bacteria, then they suddenly start noticing symptoms. So it is case by case, but some people do great. I mean, I think I saw in the comment section, people asking me about this woman who teaches to detox with a primarily bean-based diet. And it's like, do I deny that's helping some people? No, I mean, it has a decent amount of protein, it has a decent amount of fat, temporarily, has a decent amount of protein, has a decent amount of carbs. Temporarily, obviously, if it's only beans, you are definitely having much less fat, but temporarily, that can take the strain off your liver, and it can be a perfectly acceptable way of detoxing. It's not a sustainable way of losing weight, I would say, based on everything we just talked about. But the point is, for some people, it makes them feel better. For some people, it makes them feel worse. So fiber, even more, you have to have carbs, in my opinion. Now, you can survive without them, but you definitely don't have to have fiber. And a lot of people feel better when they really minimize their fiber. It's one of the reasons why people feel better on a carnivore diet or something like that, because they or just, an animal-based diet, basically, even if it includes eggs and dairy and stuff like that. Basically, there's zero fiber in any of that stuff. Anything animal-based, zero fiber. And a lot of people do feel better on that, and it's one of the reasons why. But so it's the most variable.
Okay, because I would have thought Or a theory would be, well, as you introduce these things, let's say, you have those issues that like you don't have any of those good bacteria, but you're wanting to proliferate those good bacteria. You would want to bring in those foods that feed those good bacteria, so that you do start to house them in a way. But if people are,
that is the general theory. That's the mainstream theory. It's also the functional medicine theory. But there is just countless case studies and, in fact, studies of people where that is not true, and it's the exact opposite. It makes people feel worse. And it's like, oh, well, there's something wrong with you if you can't handle fiber. I know that's what the pro-fiber people say. And I would say, yes, I agree. But that thing that's wrong with them is wrong with a lot of people, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I've talked about this before. The idea that antibiotics kill all your bacteria is nonsense. It's not true. And I say that based on seeing people after taking loads of antibiotics and then before and after of their stool sample, their microbiome, they still have loads of bacteria. Often they have a large diversity of bacteria even. But one thing I will say, which I think is true from experience, is antibiotics, especially, high dose, long period of time, et cetera, it does tend to kill off the good bacteria. And once you kill the good bacteria, it is hard to get them to come back in adequate amounts. And the adequate amounts, I
was going to say, how do we do that? Or is that a whole nother episode?
Yeah, definitely. A healthy baby has like 80+% of bifidobacteria, although there's more and more children born with, less these days. I saw studies around it, but it's still considered that 80+% is the normal, natural, healthy range. I saw a study on some woman who lived, I can't remember what it was, over 120. They tested her microbiome, and it was the usual thing, she drinks, I don't know, coffee, or she eats chocolate or something, and everyone was focusing on that. They tested her microbiome. She had over 50% bifidobacteria, still at 120. The percentage that the average person has? Less than 0.1%. Like almost everyone has almost none, and a lot of people have none. Like, you test them and they have absolutely none. And so, of course, that 120-year-old, whatever it was, 120-something-year-old lady, she's going to be able to handle fiber and a bunch of other things radically differently than, all the people I see with 0% bifidobacteria in there. And it's just one example. It's one of the most, important and also researched positive bacteria, but there are several. There's quite a few, and so when you are depleting all those, it's a different reality for you, and you have to accept yourself as you are, not as you wish you were.
Right. Yeah. That's going to be another episode. Tick that box. Yeah, because there's a lot of that out there. So, but I just would have. I would have thought it would be a simple thing of, well, let's just reintroduce it and let's just help repopulate it. But it doesn't really seem like that might be the case.
No. By all means, if you find the magic thing that people are saying, oh, you just got to take this and it only ever feeds the good bacteria and it doesn't feed the bad one. I've not found it. I've seen that claim about a bunch of things, and I found it to be completely universally untrue, both in practice and also just if you dig into the research. Oh, well, it does actually feed blah, 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 blah. Like, it's never only the good bacteria. And so if you have almost none of the good bacteria and you have loads of even as I said, just the okay bacteria, the commensal bacteria, it doesn't work the magic way. It's back to that utopianism, I think, that's at the root of a lot of this. It doesn't work the magic way that, oh, well, you should have 20% of bifido and 20% of this other one. And so if you've got 50% of this other one and 0 bifido, if you give it this food, then the bifido will grow back. No. Just the one that you've already got too much of that will proliferate even more and become even more out of balance. Like, it's just logic, right? Because if you think about how, doubling the population of something, if you have 40% of one and 0.1% of one, if you double the population of both, what's that going to do, right? Like, the amount that it's going to take to get the bifido to a level you want of feeding, you're going to completely overfeed everything else, like, before you even get there, just logically, right? Logically and also in practice, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. So let's put that on the list for next. Well, I know we're still here, on the best things, and we've gone through. You've gone through the carbs and the fiber. Was there anything else before you want to get to taste?
Yeah, because we've talked about the micronutrients already. We could go in depth about that, but we've done quite a few episodes already on the micronutrients and where to get them and all the rest of it. So I would say if you follow these general recommendations, again, from my experience, having gone through a lot of people's diets and doing the nutritional evaluation of every single nutrient and all the rest of it, if you're following this advice, you're doing better than 80% of people in terms of micronutrients. At least. And it's important you do so because a lot of people get away with not having the best food choices by eating more. So they're eating 120% of their calorie needs, for instance, and they're getting 100% of the micronutrient needs. If you want to lose weight, you're going to be doing the opposite. You're going to, get 90% of your calorie needs. And so it's all the more important to make sure that what you eat is micronutrient dense to make up for it. But I think I've explained that already and how to do it enough.
Yeah, and you guys, if you can't find it, just put it in the comments. I can direct you to a previous episode or anything like that. I'm happy to help. Right. So, how about taste?
Yeah, let's finish with taste, and then we'll have to talk about the different types in the next episode, I think, because it's gone long. Okay, so there's basically two types of food, right? There's savory food and sweet food. Do we agree on that? Is there a third? I mean, it's basically it, right? It's either a main meal or it's a dessert. So if we're talking about savory foods, the primary thing that's going to make it taste good, that's more important than every other factor put together, is putting in the correct amount of salt. And so taste is so important to people, right? Like a lot of people I've seen a lot of people who are told, um, if you and sometimes even by mainstream medicine, like in the case of a heart disease, if you carry on eating this way, you're going to die. Uh, but if you eat this way, you're going to live. And people look at the diet and they're like, I'd rather die. Like a lot of people make that choice just for the sake of taste, right? That's what they believe anyway. I think there's more to it, right? As we've talked about in detail in this episode and others. But as far as they're concerned, that's what it is. They look at the bland food that they're being recommended and they compare it in the head to the delicious food that has got them in this situation in the first place. And they're like, I'd rather stick with the delicious food, even if it means I'm going to die. So that's how important taste is to people. Like, given how important it is, you'd think that people would put a little bit more effort into discovering what actually makes things taste good. But they don't. They kind of outsource that to someone else. And so what does make things taste good? Well, I kind of jumped ahead then, but let me just zoom out for a second. There's basically two categories of things that make taste good. Things taste good. Number one, there is cheating. So there are various chemicals, especially the monosodium glutamate kind of family, which will excite the neurons excessively in a way that makes you feel like things are tastier than they actually are. And if all the food that you eat every day contains massive amounts of those, then unfortunately, you are going to have to go through a bit of a withdrawal period where the food that you eat is going to seem less tasty than what you're used to. But this is not because it actually is, it's because you're no longer cheating with drugs. That's basically what these food companies do to make their foods more addictive. There's a whole thing about how the tobacco companies, a few decades ago, bought up a lot of the food companies when tobacco started to go out of favor. Especially, there used to be doctors recommend, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Camels or whatever. It used to be like 100% cigarettes are good for you, tobacco is good for you. And then there was like a big scientific push to prove that it wasn't. And then, so the tobacco company's like, well, we still got a bunch of people addicted to our product, so that's good. But, eventually going to die out and less people are like, especially now we're not allowed to, do as much product placement and we're not allowed to advertise and et cetera, as much as before. So what are we going to do to carry on making money? Oh no, we'll buy up a bunch of food companies and, make those food's just as addictive as are cigarettes. That's the very short version of that story. So um, there's a lot of effort being put into chemicals to make your food artificially tasty, and it's actually not. It's just stimulating. Like, I don't ever eat those kind of foods, but if I accidentally do, I feel like I've taken a drug, not that the food is tasty. I can tell the difference. But of course, when you get used to it, you feel like that's the only food that tastes good. So that's the one caveat. That's the one challenge. However, the bigger practical challenge to me is people try and go from those foods that are artificially engineered and drugged to be as addictive as possible to then bland foods. And then, of course, like, they're not going to enjoy it. And so if you're used to those drugged foods, natural foods are never, non-drugged foods are never going to taste as good, but they can still taste at least okay to you. And so all of you non-drugged food eaters, you can make any of these foods that I've recommended to you to taste delicious, like as good as anything you ever tasted, just by bearing these very simple factors in mind. So I'll focus on savory food first, because I pretty much only eat savory food. This is kind of a little bit controversial, but I don't think that. I think sweet foods are potentially something to at least temporarily de-emphasize if you want to lose weight. But
What do you mean? Can you clarify that?
I mean, well, okay. So there's two extremes. Let's start with two extremes. There's me, who never eats sweet foods, right? That's considered extreme. Let's do another extreme. Someone who only eats sweet foods, right? So what would I mean when I say de-emphasize? Well, I suppose the in-between would be someone who every time they eat, they have both, right? They have savory and they have sweet, always, every time. Okay, so that would be the middle. So I'm saying I would go in the direction of me rather than the opposite extreme, because generally sweet foods, I don't know. I don't have enough evidence for this. It's just observation. My observation is that those who prioritize sweet foods, with the exceptions, as I said, of the fruitarians, the ones who are going zero fat, are more likely to be overweight. That's just the correlation that I've seen.
I understand. So especially in this context of trying to optimize weight, it's better to be more leaning towards the savory side than it would be to lean towards the sweet side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Temporarily, at least. Now,
yes.
once you are the weight you want to be, it's not, if you're moderate about it, you can add them right back in. It's something to do with insulin, but I haven't looked into it enough, and I'm not going to speculate. I'm only going to say I've observed the correlation, but it might be an interesting episode in future.
Yeah, I did. Just a quick jump in there too, as well. Like, if you are somebody that likes sweet, I mean, I hadn't had an apple for the longest time, and when I've been trying to really look at my macros, I had an apple the other day, just like a little bit of it with my lunch, and just that sweetness, it really did tick a box for me. So I did feel a little bit more, it's satiation came up in that way, in that space. So that could be, especially if you're really on the other end of the spectrum, just a little bit of taste of something like an apple or some sort of fruit that will give you that, especially when you're trying to optimize, might be helpful.
It definitely, yeah. All right, so let me clarify. What I was saying is I wouldn't want it to be a primary taste, but as I'm about to go into, sweetness is one of the 4 tastes which you actually need to have to some degree in every meal in order to feel satiated. So I will explain that. But there's a spectrum. You see, the average person who eats junk food would not find an apple sweet, right? Apples taste quite sour often, right? It depends on the breed and whatever.
I had a pink lady, just,
Sure.
That's a little sweet.
But let's say if you've just been eating table sugar before that and then you put the apple in your mouth, the primary taste that you would notice is sourness, right? Yeah. And so, there's some, like, my dad was into macrobiotic food back in the day, and They taught like was it cooked onions and dookie beans? That was like the sweet taste, And believe it or not, if you haven't had anything sweet, and then you have like caramelized onions, and I say caramelized as in only well cooked, no sugar added or anything. They taste pretty sweet. So there's a real spectrum with it, and you do need some. So this is what I say. This is why you use the word emphasize rather than using any black and white kind of wording. All right, so the secret is generally desserts even taste nice with a little bit of salt added. Like that's a kind of a bit of a secret, with ice cream, cookies, anything like that. Just a touch of salt, a pinch of salt will bring out the flavor and improve the flavor. But of course, the primary driver of the flavor with cookies or any ice cream or anything like that is the sweetness, right? It's the sugar or the fruit, the maple, whatever it is, right? The sweetener element of it. So same with savory food, the primary driver is the salt. And the number one reason why you think that your food is bland if you're eating a savory dish is because you have not put in enough salt. This is true whether it's a Greek salad or a beef stroganoff or spaghetti carbonara. It doesn't matter what it is. If it tastes bland to you, unless your neurons have been completely fried by the flavor enhancing drugs, the only thing that it's primarily usually lacking is salt. Now, when you add, so 9 times out of 10, if it tastes bland or it doesn't taste tasty, which is the other element of satiation we've talked about, it's lack of salt. But it isn't always that. So let's say you add salt, you add salt. Now it tastes salty, but it still isn't really, it's missing something. So that's then okay, it wasn't salt, right? Learning experience for next time. If you're cooking yourself, you can just add a bit more of something like more bulk in there to dilute the salt that you may have overdone a little bit. But often even just balancing out one of the other elements is enough. So for instance, a lot of time I'm eating blended vegetable soup. Just ease and it's nice, tasty. I have it along with my meat and stuff like that. And so I'm like, oh yeah, it needs a bit more salt. I put salt in this. Oh, now it tastes salty. It didn't need salt. What else could it be? The next most likely thing of what's missing from it, not for me, because I always have enough of it, but for the average person, is going to be creaminess. That's the next flavor. So if I'd have had that soup and it was just, for me, it's a vegetable soup. Obviously, for some people, it could be chicken soup, whatever. If it were just, but let's say vegetables, because vegetables don't have any fat in them. Let's say I just put vegetables in, even if I put in plenty of salt, even if vegetables, let's say it was beans, it was lentils, it was, and I put all my flavoring. Maybe I put herbs, maybe I put spices, cumin. I could go to all that work to try and make it a nice soup. And then if I also put salt in, and I'm like, you know what? Now it's just salty. It's still not tasty. What's it missing? The next most likely, no creamy. It needs some fat in there. Now there are some things that are a counterfeit creaminess that can kind of like act like they're creamy, give that creamy flavor without actually being fat. Like there's certain things like gelatine, I guess to some degree, agar, even certain beans, like your refried beans, for instance. Sometimes it has kind of creamy consistency to it, even though it is actually just pinto beans and again salt and some flavors, some spices or whatever. But generally, it's fat. It's fat that's missing. That's also going to make it taste good. And it doesn't need a huge amount. Just like I was saying if you're not used to sugar, then an apple is sweet. But if you are used to it, it's sour. So similarly, if you're more of a low-fat kind of diet, it's maybe just a teaspoon of, fat or something fatty. Maybe you could even, if it's a blended soup, you could put a macadamia nut in there or whatever, right? Like something fatty is going to give it that creamy consistency. Obviously, if you're used to fat and you like fat, it's going to be a bit more. But there'll be a certain level where you're like, now it's creamy. Now, what else could be missing? The other things that could be missing, and again, I'm talking about soup, but this is true if you're making a curry, this is true if you're making a stew, this is true even if you're just, to me, if you're just cooking a piece of meat or a piece of fish, like, and you're not really having anything else with it, like, let's talk about fish for a second, if it's boring, the number one thing is you haven't put any salt with it. But number two, if it's like a piece of salmon or something, then it's not going to need any creaminess added because it's already got the fattiness. But let's say it's a piece of cod, then putting a knob of butter on something like that is going to make it taste a lot better. It's going to just give it a better flavor. Now, the other element, if we're talking about cooking a piece of fish, would be the other kind of taste would be acid, or otherwise known as sour taste. Sour is generally not considered to be a good thing, but a sour person isn't usually a compliment. But like the word bitter is, a bitter person is not a compliment. But a bit of sour is actually pretty much universally liked, and sometimes a lot of sour. And so, with fish, again, the classic thing, if we've handled our salt and our creaminess, a little bit of lemon juice, right? That's the classic thing. That's actually, and then suddenly fish, which is generally not considered generally the best tasting protein source by most people, can be made to be delicious just by adding those three kind of elements to it. Same with my soup, same with a curry, same with a stew, same with any kind of sauce to go with a fish or to go with a steak or to go with a whatever. Like having like those tend to be the flavors. Now, the last one would be, or same with a pasta dish, same with a pizza. Now, the last element that's the least relevant for savory, but still sometimes it needs a bit, is sweet. And so with sweets, it's often more subtle, and especially with a whole meal. Like, so with a piece of fish, you're not necessarily going to have anything sweet with the piece of fish, but with the whole meal, like the sauce that goes with it, or maybe the mashed potatoes, or like something, you're going to want something with a bit more of a sweet taste. Now, as I said, sweet is contrast. In contrast to what you're used to, but it's also in contrast to what you're having right now, right? So, for instance, I don't know, like, how do you feel about curries with raisins added in, Chrissy?
Well,
very controversial.
Yeah, so I grew up Cuban, so we would have picadillo, and that would have raisins and olives mixed in. So yeah, I'm
positive?
Open. Yeah.
Okay, and pizza with pineapple added?
I'm not opposed.
Okay, so there
you
go.
But I know, yeah, some people are highly opposed. No, I'm not. I mean, it might not be my go-to, but yeah, I'd try it.
And that makes sense as you are the more carb person genetically, right? But I say that more to bring up the point of those same people maybe with, like, let's say, oh, I don't want raisins in curry or in salads. Oh, I don't want pineapple on pizza. Why? Because it's too sweet. Okay, but maybe then if they said what's for dessert, and I was like raisins and pineapples, and they like, that's not sweet enough, right? So the point is, it's like it's a contrast thing, right? And so just the right level of sweetness. I'm not saying it's like a tomato sauce, for instance, with a pizza. If you would put a little bit of sweetener in there, often because unfortunately, if the tomatoes were naturally ripened enough, then the tomatoes themselves would be sweet enough. But like a little bit of sweetener in there, with a lot of different things, people love it. And Thai food, famously, they've got some sweetness in there. Often they just put sugar in. Chinese food, very famously, very often they've got some kind of sweetener in there. Indian food, they've often got some kind of sweeteners in there. So Mexican food, maybe not really, but there's a lot of rice and beans, which are this as a more, and then heavily cooked onions, which are these more subtle form of sweetness, right? Whereas if your food were to be only, and this is going back to the diet thing, if all I'm eating is cooked salmon with broccoli, like there's no element of sweetness there, right? Like if you then add a bit of mashed potato, it's not sweet, but it hits that fourth thing, which otherwise is missing without it, if that makes sense. So those are like the four primary tastes that we like. As I say, it's split into If it's supposed to be a dessert or a sweet food, then it's going to be high sweet, minimum salt. If it's supposed to be savory, it's going to be high salt, minimum sweet. But that's the only real distinction. Now, some people also like bitter flavors, especially in some context. Desserts especially, sweet foods, often a bit of bitter in there, a chocolate cake or something like that. But also, not only, tiramisu with coffee added, another bitter flavor, right? Various different bitter tastes can work well, especially with sweet foods and spicy foods. Spicy taste can work well with savory foods specifically, but those are a matter of taste. Some people like them, some people don't. Everyone likes the 4 tastes I just said to some degree. There are some people who tolerate 0 bitterness, they don't like it. There are some people who tolerate 0 spiciness, they don't like it. Everyone likes a certain amount of those 4 tastes. And so once you understand that, and even if, say, you're a person who loves spicy food and you're making chili, fair enough. But if it's not tasty enough, those are the things. And so, when my wife and I go to a restaurant, we bring our own salt. We don't really trust the salt on the table there, but we make sure, and we don't go crazy with salt. As I said, I don't like it if it tastes salty, but I just want the right amount of salt in there, and it's the most important thing for me as a savory food eater, that it has that appropriate amount of salt. But basically, if you go into restaurants or something like that, between salt, lemon, sugar, and or stevia, I suppose, and a little tub of coconut oil, you can basically make anything taste good just by adding those elements in. Obviously, it'd be better if the chef, the preparer, got those elements right themselves. And I say, obviously, if it's a restaurant you're going to full taste, I guess they already do it the way you like it. But I'm saying, if you're trying to go healthy, if you're trying to follow all this advice I'm giving you, right? Let's say, what you really love is, I don't know, bacon. And I'm telling you that it'd be better to have, sardines or beef or something like that. I don't really like sardines or beef. Okay. But if it's prepared in the right way where these things are balanced, actually, you probably still would, And if you love pork, then probably the taste you really like, especially, is, salt and fat, specifically. And so, a ribeye with an adequate amount of salt on it, you probably still find fairly satisfying, even if it's not as tasty as what you love about pork, or even with fish, right? If you were to have, again, salmon with enough, or swordfish, I think tastes especially like pork, but it has a little bit too much mercury in it, unfortunately. But you can. You may not be able to get to the thing that you absolutely love the most, 100% of the way there, but you can get 90% of the way there if you just are aware of these flavors and adapt them. And obviously, if you're cooking for yourself, you can do this yourself. But as I said, if you're going out to eat, or if you're going to a family member's, is it a bit weird to have those things with you? I'm sure it is. But you can just say it's part of your special diet or whatever, or, the problem with taste, of course, is it's such a thing that people have a lot of ego attached to. But the truth is, everyone's tastes are different. So despite what I've just said, the precise amount of those 4 flavors will vary person to person at the level that they find it the tastiest. And this is where, as I said, the things where you go to a restaurant and everyone just loves it, which unfortunately, it's mainly fast food. And it's because they're cheating. They're putting a bunch of chemicals in. And to be honest, that's true even for the fancy restaurants. Anywhere that they use stock. So the very fanciest of fanciest restaurants might make their own stock, but most of them, they'll use the bouillon cubes, or just the tubs full of bouillon, and that is just full of MSG. That's the main thing in there, and they put it in almost everything. So, and as I said, it's standard in, certain cuisines like Chinese food, but it's certainly not only Chinese food. From what I've seen, every Italian restaurant I worked at, stock. What is stock? It's just MSG. For almost every dish, it's added in there. So, and I don't have experience working in Indian restaurants, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of stock element to it. They do put a lot more flavor, spices, and all the rest of it in there. So, I don't know, maybe not, but probably. And certainly with Thai food, certainly with Chinese food, and certainly with Mexican food as well. It's the same thing. They use stock. I don't know. I'm just listing cuisines now, but yeah, generally, if they tell you there's no MSG in there, that just means that they haven't literally got a tub of MSG and put some white powder in there. But like if they're using any kind of fish sauce, we're talking about Thai, like any kind of Worcestershire sauce, I don't know, any kind of out of the bottle thing that they're using, any kind of out of a bottle, out of a tub, that thing is probably loaded with MSG, and that's where a lot of their or the MSG analogs, there's a bunch of them these days, and that's probably where a lot of the flavor is coming from, if it's not done properly in the way that I'm talking about, like actually getting it right. But as I said, the challenge with actually getting it right is that people's tastes are a little bit different, and so there's nothing wrong, even though everyone likes those four flavors, there's nothing wrong with going somewhere and just adjusting it slightly to suit you. And to be honest, like a good chef knows this. A good chef knows that some people like more salt than others. And the good chef also knows it's impossible to take salt away. So actually it is better to undersalt your food and let the person at the table choose to add some if they choose to, right? Sometimes, like with seafood especially, they give you a little thing of lemon. So you can choose, even though, often it's already cooked in lemon, so you can choose how much you want to add. There's really nothing wrong with that. And especially if you're trying to get yourself to start eating healthy food, or you're trying to get yourself to eat, non-full of chemicals and addictive food, then it's kind of sensible to have these things with you so that you can just optimize the taste so that you feel genuinely satiated by what you're eating.
That's a really great conversation. I'm glad that you brought it up like this, because I think a lot of times we don't really think about it in this way, in this chemistry and in this design of, what is it that I feel like I'm really wanting a little bit more of. And so thank you for breaking it down, because even though I may be doing it, but I'm just doing it in a roundabout way of not understanding why I'm doing it or what I'm trying to achieve. So that's really, really good, especially as we really are trying to figure out what satiates people with their food.
Yeah, and that's basically it. If you're meeting your energy needs, you're meeting your nutrient needs, and you're meeting your taste needs, then you can feel loved. Then you can feel successful, right? I mean, it goes down to that. And if you can do that and be on a 200 to 300 calorie deficit, then you can lose weight and keep it off.
Yeah, no, that's really, really, yeah, perfect. Woohoo! No, listen, I know we're at time, and there was a few others about the 5 different hormonals, which I think we'll have to get to in another time. But is there anything that you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, let's do that next time. And I'm interested in people's feedback to this one. Leave it in the comments on YouTube or Rumble. But to be honest, I check YouTube a lot more frequently.
Perfect.
Oh, and to find out your type, go to hormetics.health, take the quiz, and let me know in the comment section as well, what types you got and how accurate you feel it is.
You heard it here, and I will put that link in the description as well. And we, as always, are grateful for you guys spending your time with us. Please remember that supporting our sponsors supports this podcast. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.